Happy Tuesday, American history students. Hope everybody had a great Easter break. Get to spend some quality time with your families. I know it's probably a different Easter than normal as we deal with this coronavirus shutdown. But just the same, I hope everybody had a great break and got to spend some quality time with your families. Hey, uh, today, Tuesday, April 14th, EOY vocab quiz, the practice Kahoot is up. This is our last one of these. And I know we don't have an end of course test, but I've continued to do these just because they're important terms for anybody to know and they're an easy grade. So practice those. We'll take that quiz at the end of this week. We're going to take video notes. We're actually going to skip a question. As I said in this study guide, we're going to skip through some things and just hit on some of the key points. So we're going to do 25-1, number 3 and 4. That is going to deal with Nixon's Southern strategy and something really interesting in American history, the moon landing in 1969. All right. The only other thing you'll have to do today is an exit ticket. Okay. So let's get into notes for today. This is the one we're skipping over. Number 2, how did Nixon approach the following domestic issues dealing with inflation? I'll talk about them briefly, but you don't have to take any notes on these. All right. The oil crisis and the social programs. Inflation is when prices increase drastically and outpace wages. So that's something that every president has to deal with. We don't want inflation. Prices were increasing. That means Americans had less money. We had an oil crisis. This is kind of coming back to us right now with oil prices so low. You notice the gas stations prices are very, very low. OPEC, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, is still around, and they just announced that they are going to limit the supply of oil that they put out. That will increase the price of oil. Doesn't impact the United States as much anymore because we've become a lot more oil independent. But during the 60s and 70s and 80s, it was a big deal. All right. And Nixon is going to work to cut back on social programs of the New Deal and the Great Society and pass more of that responsibility on to the states to provide social welfare programs for their citizens. All right. But the two we're going to take notes on today, Nixon's Southern strategy and how Nixon fulfilled one of JFK's main goals. All right. So Nixon's Southern strategy has to do with him running for president and the civil rights movement. All right. In any election that he had participated, Nixon and his advisors noticed, hey, he was not very big with the African-American population. Very few African-Americans had ever voted for him. So Nixon is kind of a realpolitik. What's in it for me? What do I have to gain? And so he felt that he had little to gain if he ran on the ticket of being a big civil rights activist, supporter of civil rights. He said, African Americans aren't going to vote for me anyway. If I were to go that route, I would lose a lot of the white Southern vote. So in order to get elected, I'm going to say, I don't really care about civil rights. All right. So that's going to be his Southern strategy. If he supported, civil rights, he would risk losing all the Southern white vote and thereby put him at jeopardy of winning the election. Remember his philosophy. His philosophy is to defeat opponents at all costs, even if that meant not supporting the right thing. So it sounds like a bad stance to take is I don't care about minorities, but it's going to help him win the election. Remember, minorities, African Americans in particular, only about 10% of the population. And so he figured, what do I have to lose? And so he did not support the civil rights movement. And along with Martin Luther King being assassinated in 1968, Robert Kennedy being assassinated in 1968, Nixon becoming president in 1968, that's when we see a slowdown of the civil rights movement. Okay. Now, the main one for today, how did Nixon fulfill one of JFK's goals? In 1961, JFK, in his inaugural address, made a bold claim that by the end of this decade, we are going to put a man on the moon. All right. And that's the goal that Nixon is going to fulfill. On July 16th, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida. And its goal was to get to the moon, about 240,000 miles away. Going to take a couple days just to get there. On July 20th of 1969, and we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of this happening last year. So there was a lot of things in the news about it. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin touched down. Michael Collins, there was a third astronaut on this mission with Apollo 11. Michael Collins would remain in the in orbit in the control module. The Eagle was the lunar module that would land. The control module, Michael Collins would continue orbiting, and they would meet up again a day later. All right. Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong spent 22 and a half hours on the moon, about 2.5 hours or so outside of the Eagle, collecting rocks and samples and things like that. I'm going to give you some cool moon landing facts here at the end of this. This was watched, this event, by about a fifth of the world. Billions of people watching this on TV. All right. Everybody was tuned in to check this out. They even had a on-air phone call, first phone call from the moon to Earth between Neil Armstrong and President Nixon. They would return safely to Earth on July 24th, landing in the Pacific Ocean about 900 miles from Hawaii, where they would go in quarantine. There, as we're dealing with this coronavirus quarantine, they would go into quarantine. Second time they've been in quarantine for about the next 14 days on the USS Hornet. The U.S. would return to the moon with ensuing Apollo missions and other missions 5 more times until 1972, and have never been back since then. All right. So there's been a lot of calls recently to, hey, why don't we return to the moon? Maybe there's some scientific gains for it. You know, at least get us as a springboard training to get to eventually where we've been talking about a lot in the world is Mars. You know, so it's kind of interesting. This is all coming back up. Now, some interesting moon landing facts I wanted to mention with you that most people don't know. These astronauts could not get life insurance policies for their families because the dangers of this mission were so great that no insurance agency would give them any life insurance. So they came up with their own plan to provide for their families. They had to go into quarantine before their mission as well for a couple weeks. And essentially what they did was autograph thousands of pictures and memorabilia and things like that. And that way, if something happened and they didn't make it back, their family would be able to sell those things because they're going to be worth money either way, if it's successful or not. So that was their way of looking out for their family. Another interesting thing, knowing that this was such a dangerous mission, President Nixon had his speechwriters write 2 speeches. One announcing on TV that we did it, success. And these 3 guys landed on the moon and successfully took off and headed home and landed in the Pacific Ocean. The other one was a just in case because it was about a 50-50 shot that these guys were even going to live through this whole ordeal. And so they actually wrote another speech just in case things didn't go well and they didn't make it. Neil Armstrong was the first to walk on the moon because he was the ranking member astronaut on board. He outranked Buzz Aldrin, but Buzz Aldrin was the first to do something else on the moon. He was the first to pee. Astronauts had containers for if they had to use the restroom that were connected to them, and he took Holy Communion on the Eagle module, and then when he got out, he immediately filled up his urine container so that he could say he was the first to do something on the moon. These guys left over 100 items on the moon, including this flag, a plaque saying that we come here in peace. Neil Armstrong, historically, when he stepped on the moon, his first words were one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. That's been argued about since, how he said that and whether it was grammatically correct or not. But they left a bunch of trash and all kinds of other things that they'd had just so they would be able to take off again and get back airborne to meet up with the Michael Collins module to head back to Earth. And so, including they left behind, Neil Armstrong took a golf club, actually just the head of a golf club, and it was meant to fit with a rock collector. And he actually got in trouble for that because he snuck it on the mission and did not tell his supervisors. And they said, hey, that could have messed up the weight. Um, when they took off from the moon to get back into orbit to meet up with Michael Collins' module, a switch was broke that would not allow them to take off, and they were able to fix it by jamming a felt tip pin in the control and flipping it up. Crazy. Now, since this time, there have been a ton of conspiracies about the moon landing. There's been a lot of conspiracies that, and many Americans believe that we didn't actually do this, that instead it was filmed in a movie theater, or not a movie theater, movie studio, essentially filmed in Hollywood with special effects and things like that. And they actually did a Mythbusters show on this to study whether or not it was actually it actually happened or not. They looked at the flag and how it was straight sideways. They looked at the footprints and whether or not in moon dust or moon or ground it would look like that. And Mythbusters declared, yeah, we did it. The conspiracies have not been as big in recent years because we now have moon satellites that orbit the moon, and essentially like Google Earth, like Google Moon. They can take pictures of the moon's surface and they become a lot clearer. Here is what we used to be able to look at with old types of satellites. Now we have satellite images that are very, very clear. And so we can look at all 6 moon landing locations. We can see where the module landed. You can even see the flag that was posted. You can see the astronauts' footprints. In ensuing missions, they would actually take a moon buggy that they could ride around on. You could see their footprints, and we left the moon buggies behind, and so you could see those. And so those kind of debunks some of the conspiracy theories, but hardcore conspiracy theorists would say that these images are faked as well. So, hey, we'll pick up tomorrow. We'll start up section 2. Make sure to answer the exit ticket today, and have a great day, guys.